Okay, Booker T and the MGs taking us all the way back to 1962 with Green Onions. This was a classic, it still is, and in fact it was the band's debut album, the title track from the band's debut album in 1962. This is Leid Stories. I'm Utrice Leid, and a couple of things. As you know, today is a big day in Washington, D.C. We have hearings that are going on, back-to-back hearings. Former special counsel Robert Mueller is in a marathon session as a star witness today, appearing before two separate congressional committees looking for more specifics on two key issues they believe were not definitively addressed in his 448-page report that he submitted to Congress in April. Mueller has said those and other related issues were not part of the strict mandate that he was given, and that prosecution of a president is the prerogative of Congress, not his office and not his role. Members of the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee are probing whether Russian operatives colluded with Trump and his campaign to interfere with the 2016 presidential election, and whether Trump obstructed justice. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler says closer questioning of Mueller will link Trump, this is his belief, to very serious crimes that are impeachable. But the truth-averse Trump says that Mueller's report was nothing but a political hit. If things go, or if things don't go well, or at least they don't appear to be going well today for Trump, Democrats say they are ready to begin impeachment hearings immediately. So they spent a lot of time, but I have a problem. And, I'm not so narcissistic that I believe that my problem is the world's problem, but I have a problem with these hearings. Whatever you think, there's one thing that cannot be denied, and this is a historic moment. Anytime you're talking about impeachment of the highest office holder in the land, that's a big moment in a country's history. But these hearings are being rushed as if people, all of them in Congress, have to catch a train or a plane someplace. And the speed at which they're going does not allow. Maybe they're okay with it because they have law degrees and they've been to law school and they have legal experience and all of that stuff. But the average person observing these hearings, the hearings come across as McHearings, like the McDonald's version of hearings. There's this big rush. And with it comes a kind of snotty attitude that if you don't know what they're talking about, they're flinging around, all these titles as if we're supposed to know. This is the part that bothers me. We are in the middle of a very serious moment in our history as a nation. The focal point of these hearings is not even in the room, okay? And it's the President of the United States. The focus of the questioning is about getting to the heart of two central issues. Whether the president obstructed justice by directing people he had hired and people working for him to do certain things, to divert attention, to cover up this matter of foreign interference in the 2016 elections and manipulating the elections so as to produce the desired result, which is the election of Donald Trump. This is a very serious charge. This is a very serious thing. Based on that, Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel and given the charge of conducting a preliminary investigation, which he did. He came to the conclusion, because in his capacity, he could not really prosecute anybody, although that's where he comes out of, prosecution. But that was not his charge. He was given specific instructions about what was to be investigated. Were Russian operatives in one way or the other working with American operatives in the 2016 election cycle to get Trump elected? That's huge. And then did the president himself and others that he designated, did they cover up or did they implement certain tactics to hide this collusion with the Russian operatives? It's a big story. It's a big deal. And when you're talking about countries as a whole, and you see the major scare here is that what the entire country takes for granted, which is free and fair elections, we have indications that the 2016 presidential election was not fair, nor was it free. Big issue. Okay, so Mueller conducts his preliminary investigation and then issues a report, 448 pages, in which he says a lot of things. But among them, he says that he found no evidence of collusion, but he did see evidence based on the investigation. There appeared to be evidence of obstruction of justice. Now, if this were an ordinary citizen, well, we proceed. But this is the President of the United States. And therefore, this investigation warrants very special and careful attention. And so it brings us to today, where the decision is to concentrate on the questions that members of Congress and the committees in Congress have about this 448-page report and contradictions that they see in this report that need further probing. Okay, so they bring, or I should say more accurately, Mueller agrees to testify. And so they set up this day of hearings, back-to-back hearings, from two special committees, the House Judiciary Committee and the House Intelligence Committee. Very powerful committees. So I'm looking forward now. First of all, I thought it was unusual that you'd pack it all in one day. And in packing all of this action in one day, it means that you're in a hurry. You're in a hurry to get these hearings over with. Everybody's in a hurry. Everybody's under the clock. Back-to-back hearings like these, hearings that are going on today, are most unusual. And considering the environment of these hearings, it makes it even more so. You would want to take your time, not that, it should take 4 years, but I question why the hearings are to be held on the same day back to back. So, excuse me, so the little snippets that I watched, before the answer is gotten, it's forgotten. They're moving fast. What's with the speed? Why do you have to have these hearings, both of them on the same day? Why must they be back to back on the same day? And why does it appear that the interest is in getting this thing over with and not so much understanding what is happening or what has happened? And that will come from testimony from people allowed the time to give their testimony. But you have witnesses being cut off, interrupted. You have shortcuts because it appears that the clock rules the day, not the intention, but the clock rules the day. Everybody's obeying the clock and not the purpose of these hearings. So I question that. And I question whether this, as a whole, these hearings will produce, at least in the hearts and minds of the public, let alone the legislators, a satisfactory result, that they have taken on their leg, if you will, of investigation, and they have done it thoroughly. So I'm really annoyed today. And I think there's something behind this rush to get through with this matter and set it aside and keep moving. You understand what I'm saying? At a moment like this, you would expect the gravity of the situation to yield to some kind of common sense approach. You cannot have, or you should not have, so-called high-powered hearings such as this, in which possible impeachment of a president is being contemplated as a consequence of his alleged actions and the consequence of alleged involvement by foreign powers, namely Russia, to channel the result before the election is even had. It's a very serious matter. And you mean to tell me, in this serious matter, it will not be allowed for witnesses, and they call these people in. They compel them to appear before these committees and to answer questions, supposedly so grave that, you have to have special people with special knowledge telling you what they know about inside matters. And you can't get a cogent response from most of them because they're being interrupted, they're being cut off, they're being hurried along. They're even told that their answers are kind of off base. Well, you're either interested in having a hearing, which is not choreographed, or you are continuing the very thing that you are blaming the president and his administration for, which is distorting and violating both the essence and the actual law of the land. I'm not one way or the other. I'm not taking a position. I'm saying, as a citizen, observing what this country, a leading country of the world, is trying to communicate to the world. This is our democracy in action. Well, you're falling far short. And it has a very nasty taste that you're not allowing the so-called democracy that you talk about all the time to prevail. Let us hear what the people have to say. We can make up our own minds. We can evaluate their testimony, which is, at least in my mind, which was your original intent, to demonstrate how open and democratic the government is, that the citizens have the same access to information as even legislators today. Everybody's hearing the testimony. Everybody has a chance to evaluate it in their own light. And then you move on. But I think they committed a very serious breach of protocol today. And I don't know how much credence you can give a process that for the entire time that Mueller is testifying, members of Congress are basically told to hurry up, or that they're running out of time and they have to move along. So I call it the MEC hearings. Hurry up and tell us what it is you have to tell us, and then go away. And leave us to handle all the heavy lifting. You're just, like in play, you're just a walk-on. You walk on, you have 2 lines to say, you say your 2 lines and you get lost. You once again behind the curtains and nobody knows what becomes of you. So this is a problem. And I think it's a legitimate problem to begin to question. We cannot have these kinds of hearings and call them hearings. They're not hearings. The witnesses are not allowed the time or space to say what they have to say. And here's the other thing. Okay, so they get their so-called, quote, testimony, unquote. If the public hearings are this crazy, where people are basically pressured to obey the clock rather than the person conducting the hearings, in charge of the hearings, who can make an independent judgment. It's not just, well, your time is up, boom, there goes the hammer, you're out of here. What is this? This is wasting people's time, wasting the public's money, and perpetrating a fraud. That this is a legitimate hearing where witnesses, and the witnesses do have to be coached. You can't take 4 days to answer a question. We can all agree on that. But there are people, at least in my observation today, so many people didn't even get to actually ask the question that they wanted to ask of Mueller, because they're under such heavy pressure of time. And you can see them, they're frustrated and anxious, the people asking the questions of the witness. They're watching the clock. So because of the pressure of time, and everybody's watching the clock, could you say this was a fair process where people really were able to fully ask the questions that they wanted to ask and were able to get the answers to those questions? Or did this emphasis on time, in one way or the other, mess up the whole intent, the whole point of hearings? Like I said, this is a historic moment. And even if it weren't, it seems only fair to me that we should be able to appreciate the intent of the question and the answer to the question. And we can make up our own minds. So I kind of turned it off, because the next thing compounding this is the media coverage. These networks are all jockeying for editorial superiority and clamoring for their rightful place in the pantheon of media. They didn't have time to explain, or maybe they didn't find it necessary to take the time to explain to the public what exactly was happening in real time. All we know is that this person is is anchoring coverage for NBC, and so forth. What does that mean? If you're not able to do the job of media, which should be to educate the public and to give full coverage of this event, which I again state, in my mind, is to be regarded as a historic moment in our experience. This is not an ordinary day. But again, under the crunch of time, the media just agreed to take shortcuts all over the place, assuming that people know things which we don't know or may not know, and they're being very smug about how much they know that we, the people, do not know. And they call that coverage. It was a very disastrous, the portion that I watched, that's the reaction I had to it. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand it anymore. And so we have to have some kind of explanation as to why these hearings were so rushed. Why is it that you would get sitting on the committee just one person or three people able to ask a question, and then the witness not being able to complete the answer? One could even go so far as to make the case that that was the arrangement. They would make it so that the question would be asked, but the answer would not be fully forthcoming. Because, of course, you have time. You have to watch the clock. And this is what passes for civic involvement and media responsibility in this day and age. One guy, put him in a chair, put him at a table, and fire away. And he may answer fully, he may not answer fully, he may not answer at all. And there's no follow-up, no time for follow-up, no time to redirect the witness's testimony. And a lot went missing today. What is at stake here? Well, first and foremost, we have Trump. The President of the United States is on the hot seat. Why? Because these hearings, in effect, have a huge bearing on whether inevitably he is impeached. Whether there's enough evidence to show that his actions in certain circumstances and in certain ways were conscious actions on his part to obstruct justice and to engage in manipulation of an election with the cooperation and assistance of a foreign entity. This is a big issue. But more than that is what we have as the people. What is the information we have access to as the people? Okay, so there was a 448-page report, redacted, that it could be argued, was freely distributed to the people. I make note again, it was redacted. And understandably so, because at the time that the report was issued, there were no definitive legal conclusions made. In fact, Mueller made that point himself. He's just simply relating his findings. For the course of the investigation that he carried on for 20-something months, and hundreds of witnesses interviewed and so forth. And so it was not technically a legal instrument at the time, and certain things had to be proven before people could regard certain statements of fact and so forth as statements of fact. Okay, well, now the time has come, and the two committees, the Judiciary Committee and the Intelligence Committee, have made it known that they have questions. And those questions come out of the report. Okay, so basically, we're still in that mode of fact-finding. You organize a hearing, but now you've organized a back-to-back hearing, and the pressure is put upon both the key witness, who's Mueller, and other witnesses as well, and even the legislators. So, to what degree is this crunch, is this push affecting the quality and integrity of the hearing? That's a question. And further, what is the rush? What is the rush? Who decided that these hearings could be wrapped up by two separate committees in one day? And in fact, in less than one day. And now, a simple thing like that, to what degree does it affect the integrity of the entire investigation? And then built on that is whether it affects the integrity of any possible charges against the president and others in his administration. See, so I started, I had my notebook and my pen ready, and then within less than 15 minutes, I'm turned off. The media is malfunctioning. They're not providing proper context. They don't have time. They are, because they're covering an event or an issue in real time, the congressional hearing time is their time, too. They have to adhere to the schedule. So out the window goes any other contribution that they could make to the public understanding this issue, because they are under the crunch of time. And they're covering this live. And that's what we get. A mock hearing. Well, I wanted to add a couple of things, but we won't have time because it's important to me to hear from you. I just want to say today, a very interesting development in Puerto Rico, as we've been discussing. And today is the big adios day. The governor of Puerto Rico is leaving his office today because the people insist on it. Massive demonstrations have been conducted, and it is clear that inevitably he would be gone. It did not involve widespread violence and that kind of thing. It's just people taking responsibility for how their country is to be run. And they had correctly surmised that Governor Ricardo Rosselló was not fit for office. And so they took to the streets. Now, if we had the situation in the United States where you object to the president and his administration, and you organize mass demonstrations expressing your displeasure about it. You see what I'm saying? People said, and in fact even Trump himself made jokes about how backward Puerto Rico is. I tell you today, you can't say that at all. You can say how conscientious the people were in taking responsibility for their own futures. I'll take a break and come back at 888-874-4888. Your reactions, your questions, your comments right after this. You're listening to Leid Stories on PRN.FM. I'm Utrice Leid, and I wanted to know what you're thinking about this comment that I made about the MEC hearings today. It doesn't matter whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, whether you're Republican or Democrat. This is not the way it's supposed to go. And it should be made known all throughout the country, we won't tolerate this. If we can't get hearings done properly, then you can't blame the people for distrusting government. Ed from Queens, you're on the air. Hello, Ed? Okay, we're not hearing Ed.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay, I can hear you. I had the misfortune of being able to listen to all of the hearings on the radio because I'm not on the road right now. But it's a joke. It reminds me of the days before the first Gulf War, with the absence of evidence and evidence of absence and double talk and grandstanding. I mean, I honestly believe there's an agreement that's been made that this impeachment is going to fall below the wayside and this man is going to be allowed to have another 4 years in this country. I honestly believe that. I believe a decision has been made with the powers that be, how the Democrats are acting, how the Republicans are acting, how these hearings were rushed through, how pertinent information and serious allegations were just skated over, and the questions were not allowed to be placed in depth, answers were rushed out, and it was a lot of political grandstanding for the election. But it wasn't a sincere effort to get at the truth, whether A, was there collusion, B, was there an obstruction of justice, even though if you read the report, which I have, there's pretty compelling evidence that laid out for both. And it's just a shame that all this money, this time, and this energy is wasted when there are some serious allegations that question the integrity and the validity of this government. And I think an agreement has been made, and I think this is just a show. And we need to do like Puerto Rico, get out in the streets and shut this country down. That's what needs to happen.
To what end do you think this is happening?
Well, like I always say, there's a small cabal of individuals that rule the economy in this country. And whatever this idiot is doing, whether, his outlandish behavior, his specious comments aside, the status quo is being maintained. And that's been, I believe, the prevailing force since the days of Reagan. Maintain the status quo, keep everything on the surface at a level to where the people are rocked to sleep so we can maintain the status quo and maintain our fortunes and project into the future ways to maintain the fortunes of the powers that control this country and that control this worldwide economy. Maintain status quo. Keep the people quiet. Bread like the Romans. Bread and circuses. Keep the people quiet. Give them a show, and we'll keep them undercover. We don't want a Puerto Rico. We don't want a France. We don't even want a Haiti. We want to keep these people asleep. We want to give them the idea that things are going well, that the economy is doing well, even though the dollar is poor, even though money is cheap, even though the environment is falling apart, like putting like that old experiment that was talked about in biology. When you put a frog in a boiling pot of water, the frog will jump out. But when you put a frog in a tepid pot of water and you slowly increase the heat, the frog will stay in there until he boils to death. That's the whole idea. Maintain status quo. Keep the people quiet. Keep the masses at bay, and we're going to do this thing. And I believe that's the agreement that's been made with this guy, because the evidence is there. And if someone you take the time to go through it, you can establish collusion. You can establish interference and coercion. But they're not taking this seriously. The people are not making them take it seriously.
Thanks for calling and getting us started today. You raised some very important points. Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
We go next to Gwen from New York. You're on the air, Gwen.
Hi, Yatrice. How are you?
Okay. How are you?
I've been working and I miss your show. I hate that I can't get it every day, but I listen to you at night. So it's so good to, even though I'm sick, I had to take the day off, but it's so good to hear you again. And I did watch the hearings, and I felt like you did. Well, first of all, I think that all of these congressmen, they came at him like wild animals, And then I looked at him and I thought, this guy, it kind of appears feeble and a little bit like he can't remember. But then I'm thinking, you know what? Every single one of those congressmen picked out the passage that they wanted to talk about, and he had to go to their passages. So even though they memorized everything, it's a pretty long stack of papers he had to go through. But he still, to me, did not do, if the Democrats wanted to get something out of this, it definitely, to me, just made things worse for them. So I kind of, that's what I thought about that. And I agree with you that why are we rushing this? It's such an important thing, because there is still smoke there, and usually there's fire. There's this one other aspect that's kind of lingering in my head too, is that Mueller was the one who signed off on the Jeffrey Epstein case, that 13 months stint in so-called jail. And I keep thinking, I think, first of all, if the Jeffrey Epstein case ever gets the total recognition that it should get, it'll be the biggest case in the entire world, because every single one of these huge leaders and the people that work under them have all been blackmailed in this conspiracy. And it kind of, when you think about the fact that there is a case called that is Jane Doe versus Trump and Epstein, about a 13-year-old girl being raped in New York City at Jeffrey's mansion, and then you realize that Trump is the one who's under the gun here, but Mueller's the one who signed off on Epstein. So if this case ever actually, no one has talked about this case specifically that I have heard, only one person. And I went down, as I told you, and I got the case myself, and I read it, and it was brutal. It's heartbreaking, and it's brutal. Trump is I'm sorry, if these allegations are true, he's such a pig. I'm sorry. It was terrible what this little girl, and yes, 13 is a little girl, had to endure at the hands of these two animals. They're not even good enough to be animals, Trump and Epstein. But just think about it, that if this man Mueller was aware of this case that Trump, and these allegations that are over Trump's head, and he signed off on that, that's going to look terrible for everybody. So I kind of wonder if this Epstein thing wasn't just hanging over this entire investigation, and everybody's being very careful of just how much they're going to put out there. Because even the way they're bringing out the Jeffrey Epstein case right now has been so limited. I mean, honest to God, these charges are not new. There's so much. They're so deep. I mean, even the movie Eyes Wide Shut, there are people that have said that movie was based on the actions of Jeffrey Epstein, but he's so not alone. I mean, he's the tip of the iceberg, and if he makes it out of this alive, that'll be amazing, because I definitely think his life is in danger. But I just want to tie that back to Mueller again and say that I wonder if the real reason why Mueller's case never actually came to any solid conclusions was that perhaps Trump would go back at him with, him letting Jeffrey Epstein basically walk. So it's just food for thought, and I'm just putting it out there.
But Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were very close friends.
They're more than close friends. Trump was at his apartment, at his house. I don't know whether I told you about the case that I went downtown and got. I went down to the courthouse in New York City and I bought it. And I got it in November of 2016, and I sent it to Rachel Maddow 5 times. And I sent it before the election. And the case alleges that Epstein had one of his trollers go down to the Port Authority bus station. He found a 13-year-old girl, and she was, a runaway, but she was still a virgin, and she was lured back to his mansion by tales of famous people being there and that she could make a model connection. And, so she went back. And Trump and Epstein were standing in a room with her, and an argument started between the two of them because she was a virgin. And they fought about who was going to take her. And finally, the papers alleged that Trump won this argument. And then when she resisted, he slapped her in the face. And he said, if you resist me, I will kill everybody in your family. And that case happened not in 2016. It just came out again in 2016 because as I read the papers, the case, they tried to do something before that. And then she did start getting threats to her family, death threats to her family. And then she just didn't pursue it again. I talked to the lawyer who was head of this case in 2016, and he sounded like a very credible lawyer. He did not sound like some train tracer or chaser or some kind of crazy man. And I said, do you think this woman is really, telling the truth? And he said, yes, I really do. And when I looked at the papers, I mean, sometimes when you see things in black and white, they just really, those words jump off the page and they just punch you. And it just really hurt my heart. And that's why I sent it off to MSNBC 5 times, because I thought, if Americans, look, it's one thing to say that he's at Miss America contest and he's doing this and that and he's fooling around with people. But we're talking about a 13-year-old girl who's a virgin. And I don't think any parent, if they read those words, could have gone ahead and pulled the lever for this man. But as I went on later with this case, and I've been really, really listening to a lot of interviews.
I want to bring you back to where we started, which is
where we stand with Mueller. Well, maybe what I think we should do is we should not just look at the outcome of these hearings, but why why were the papers written like this? And why was there actually no rock-solid conclusion? And then look at the players that are involved and see what they have on each other. Because
well, let me ask you the question you just asked. Why is it that there were no solid conclusions? There's a valid reason, a legitimate reason as to why there were no solid conclusions. What would you say to that?
Because of the jurisdiction of his office, that he did not have the right to start proceedings against Trump while Trump is a sitting president, and that is true. So that is true.
Okay.
But there are places in here that could have set it up for the Congress for them to go ahead and do an impeachment based on the word of the paperwork. And I think that's what's missing here, is that it's almost like he gets up to the edge of something and doesn't quite go in. So while he's saying, he said it this morning, if Trump was not in the presidential office, I could prosecute him today. He did lead it up to the feet of Congress, and they can go ahead. They can, based on the words of that document. If they wish, they can go ahead and pursue impeachment. But I still wonder why he didn't seem to take it as far as I think he could have taken it. I believe that he could have taken it further, and I don't have any facts to base that on, except for that when you look at all the laws and the history of Donald Trump and all of the laws he has broken throughout his life. I'm sorry, I just don't think that changed too much. A horse can't really change its colors, and I don't really think Donald Trump magically got into office and changed anything about who he is. I think he has, as a matter of fact, gotten bigger and badder as far as the lies he's going to tell and the way he's going to pursue things. So I don't know. I just think that these cases, the merging of the two cases coming out at the same time also is interesting, because the Jeffrey Epstein case has been around for years, and it's an open secret. And NBC TV would not run 13 years ago. There was credible evidence, and it was given to NBC several times, and they would not run a story on Jeffrey Epstein. We might want to ask ourselves, why won't they run that story? Who is involved over there? Because I am sure that if you opened up all the Epstein files, you would probably find every person of the highest power, not just in this country, but in the world, in his books. I mean, I think that the case is the biggest case that there ever would be in the world as far as corruption and blackmail. But that's just me.
Thanks for calling in and contributing today. Lincoln from Mount Vernon, you're on the air. And we're closing in on time, just so you know.
Yeah, hello?
Hello, you're on the air, Lincoln.
Yeah, I want to say this is nothing but a charade.
Wait a minute, we're having very poor sound.
Can you hear me better?
Are you speaking directly into your microphone, or why aren't we hearing you well?
Yeah, can you hear me better?
Yes.
Yeah, it is nothing less of a charade than the Warren Commission investigation concerning Lee Oswald and Jack Ruby in the Kennedy murder. It is also no less of a charade than the 9/11 Commission investigation. And also, I think it is indicating how childish we all are, because we're all trying to sound so,
But you're not answering the question. The question is, we are having hearings today, and it's very clear that these hearings are not running according to our expectations of hearings. What are your thoughts about that?
That's what I'm saying. It's a charade. It's a joke. It's just a pretense, and it is also a pretense in the midst of the truth about this whole investigation. This is still what we are missing, is that this is still a war between Trump and the Clintons about who won or lost the investigation. And it's also about the politicized CIA and FBI. those who are taking sides with the Trumps and those who are taking sides with the Clintons. And it's kind of a sad how we're all looking at this in such a vacuum. I mean, it's out of context.
We're not all looking at it at a vacuum. I don't think that the way I'm looking at it is in a vacuum. I'm very clear. This is what we are used to when people say there are hearings being held, and at this level, there are certain expectations. We're not seeing those expectations being fulfilled. So we have questions. What are your questions?
I personally believe that it is sad that we so-called progressives, etc., who realize that it is so bogus about this Russian Russian collusion. And also, even if Russia did collude, it would be good because no one has interfered with anyone's election as much as America has. So even this conversation to me is kind of silly in the sense that we act like this is important. It is not important. And if they did collude, good for them. We on this program should be taking a different approach. And so we would help to enlighten the people rather than making all of this seem like it's so deep and profound. I don't care how many law degrees they have or how many law terminologies they're using. This is all so puerile. And we are pretending it's not puerile by some of our conversations. We need to wake up.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for today because we've come to the end of our program in terms of time. Thank you so much for contributing today. And thank you all for listening. You see, we have to ask questions. And these questions that we're asking are rather simple questions, really. They're not that complicated. But you begin to see how complicated they become when there are no easy answers. But we must still continue to ask the questions. Thanks for listening, and let's join each other again tomorrow. Bye-bye.